Today's webinar, we're going to go over some key simple security steps. This is primarily aimed, well, we'll get into that in a little bit, but what we hope that you'll discover, there's transitions, is that cybersecurity ultimately isn't just an IT issue. It doesn't have to be expensive. There's some pretty simple and straightforward things that you can start doing right now, and some good next steps that are available to you that, again, you can get started with right now. This is basically, if you're not a cybersecurity expert, you're not already working on a formal cybersecurity plan, and you don't necessarily have the greatest view of where you are and what to do next.
And I'm going to interject on this one because I think this is really, really critical, is that this webinar is not a formal security plan, cybersecurity plan in any way, shape, or form. But we find a lot of organizations that we talk to before they join up with us, they don't necessarily have a cybersecurity strategy, and they feel, how can we start? It's so complex, it's so whatever. We just want to give some starting points. So.
Yep, absolutely. As we get into a little bit further, security is very complex, and you've got to start somewhere. So this is some good ideas on where to get started and how to adapt those into your environments.
Cool.
So let's imagine here that you could just wave a magic wand and just kind of have a better idea of where things are at. So one thing that this would help out with is getting that picture and understanding of what you have, and also building that foundation of a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy.
So this is getting started.
Yep, absolutely. So a little bit about us. I'm Adam. I'm on cybersecurity czar here at Simplex. So I handle all the security posturing stuff that we do internally, compliance stuff, instant response. If it falls into the bucket of security, I deal with it.
He's the bucket guy.
Yes. Try not to wear them on my heads too often.
And as you can see, both Adam and I have follically changed ourselves since these pictures. But I'm the CEO of Simplex-IT and crotchety old geek, written a few books, all that kind of fun stuff. So.
Yep, absolutely. So why are we so passionate about security? Well, security is scary. It involves every day, and we like sharing what we know. Big emphasis, though, on security is constantly evolving. If you've caught the news in the last month, a lot of stuff's been happening. It can get pretty scary when you see all the news reports out there, and it doesn't necessarily have to be. And when you look at the industry as a whole, the more that we can share, the more we can help one another. Because let's face it, no one likes being on the receiving end of a security incident. And if we can share what we know, how we do it, hold each other accountable, help out, that moves the needle to everyone being a little bit more secure, and that makes things a little bit harder for the bad guys.
And the two things I want to point out here is, number one, and if you've heard me speak on security, you've heard it 1,000 times, the bad guys are financially incentivized. So they are entrepreneurs. They are coming up with better and better ways, more creative ways to make money, to do their thing. And so they're not just I wrote a virus and there it goes. So they've got money, they've got opportunity, they got motive, they got great people working for them. Because they're entrepreneurs. The second thing is that this isn't going away. As long as this business model for cyber criminals exists, and as long as the threat to them remains as low as it currently is, cybersecurity is not going to disappear. It's going to continue, and until the model is gone. So we're in for the ride. And absolutely, if you have any comments or questions, put them in the chat.
Yep. So let's actually get into the meat and potatoes here. Some of those key simple security steps and where we can get started and what you guys can start doing about it. So there are a couple caveats here. Namely, this is for small to medium organizations. This is not for, this is for organizations that do not have a security strategy fleshed out yet. This does not deal directly with any compliance requirements, and this is only a starting point. So you're just getting into things, this is a great start there. But if those compliance mandates do come into play, this does not deal with them, but it can support them. if that makes sense.
Cool.
So what we're going to discover and get into here, that cybersecurity isn't just about the fancy tools. Lord knows you go to any trade show, you spend any time on any social media, there's 1.5 million tools out there, from antivirus vendors, firewalls, EDR, XDR, alphabet soup acronyms from everywhere. It's not about that. The tools are a great helper, but you can have all the fancy tools in the world and still have security incidents and still miss the mark. So this is what this gets into, is that it's more than just the tools.
Yeah, and Raymond adds the point of the bad guys also share attack method and vulnerabilities among their peers. And thank you that meetings like today's are where we're sharing strategies. And absolutely, we use the term coopetition, where the bad guys are, and in some cases they're reselling their product to each other. So a bad guy can sell the way they do things to another bad guy, and because they're entrepreneurs.
Yeah, there's plenty of great resources out there from a whole bunch of companies that get into the deep dive into things like the dark web and those marketplaces for malware and security issues. I could probably ramble about that for a good couple hours.
Seriously, you could. Yeah,
I think
no
I
doubt.
have. But no, they're well organized, well funded professionals, as Bob was saying earlier. And it really keeps us on our toes, and we've got to figure out how we can mitigate against that and bring it down to something that's affordable and achievable for small to medium businesses. So yeah, getting back to the slide here, I mean, this helps out painting that picture of the status quo and where things are at. I'm sure anyone here from the IT side of stuff knows there's technical debt out there and so many things of, I'll come back to this later. And this helps put a little bit of a frame around that and help understand a little bit of that and give good jumping off points, which feeds right into that. How do you get started and where to start, and then leads very well into some next steps.
Cool.
So let's do some basics here. Cybersecurity 101. What we're looking at here is something called the CIA triad. Anyone that gets into the information security route and all the certifications that come with it, this is pretty core to what's out there for data security and information security. So the 3 pillars of this, you have confidentiality. So it has its limited availability. Think things like your HR records. Those need to be confidential so that the bad guys don't have them, for one, but also John Smith down in the machine shop floor also doesn't have access to them. And making sure that the right people have the access. That then leads into integrity, basically that your data is only changeable by those who should be able to change it, and that the data that's there is trustworthy. Think your banking stuff. Whenever you open up your banking app and you see the balance there, you have to be able to trust that figure is accurate. That transcends more than just obviously financial data, but all data in the organization. This PowerPoint, Bob and I have to trust that we were the ones that made the edits to it, and that Patty didn't jump in and make a random change somewhere,
which she would do.
Yes. So, but that's even more critical when you look at trusted business processes and the security tools that are out there. Those have to be trustworthy, otherwise the data gets construed and kind of sloppy. We've seen instances out there in the industry as a whole is where financial data about bank routing numbers, a bad guy gets into the environment and makes a change to that routing number, no one catches it, and before you know it, money is leaving and going into the wrong accounts. That's just one example. And lastly is that the data is available. The data is pretty useless if no one can have access to it and it's just not available at all. So it's that balance between the 3 of these pillars that really gets to the core of information security.
And let's think about this from a damage standpoint. Confidentiality. If that's compromised, all of a sudden your information is either made public or at least is shared with bad guys. So that's bad thing. That's damage.
Yeah,
Integrity.
actually, to back off that right now, there's been a couple things. A headline recently is that Microsoft was recently hacked. There's a ransomware group out there that operates very differently than the rest. Rather than messing with the availability of your data by ransoming it and encrypting it, they're going to mess with the confidentiality of that data. They basically told Microsoft, pay us millions of dollars or all this proprietary information and source code gets published on the web. and that's their operation manual.
Whereas integrity is, like you say, it's been changed, and then availability, you can't get to it because it's been encrypted. And I also want to point out one thing is, don't forget the internal. And like Adam was saying, you want to make sure that John Smith out on the shop floor doesn't have access to your HR records. A lot of cyber hacking or cyber crime is actually committed by disgruntled employees or former employees who still were given access to the network or to data that they either shouldn't have, or it should have been removed because they're leaving.
Yep, and there's also, on the note of integrity and all that as well, a lot of organizations, especially in the defense industrial base, there are specific requirements around insider threat training. Because a lot of the bad guys too, especially nation states, will pinpoint new employees or vulnerable employees and basically blackmail them, saying, give me the secrets and data that you have access to, or else.
Yep. Cool.
So next topic in here, the NIST cybersecurity framework. This was developed by the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and it provides an industry standard guidance for security practices for organizations of all sizes. You can guarantee that the stuff that we're doing is adapting to this and working this into our strategy, and the Pentagon themselves are doing the same thing, or SpaceX, or Ford, or Chevy. 1.5 million other companies build around this framework, and it's respected worldwide. So if you ever get into international markets or acquisitions by international companies, they're likely looking at the exact same framework here and building their processes around this because it's so well established, well respected, and straightforward to work with.
So when we talk about like compliance requirements, Adam, like HIPAA, CMMC, NIST, all that kind of stuff, that, or excuse me, NIST is not technically a compliance requirement, but it's the framework on which a lot of those guys are based. Is that a fair statement?
Yep. Yeah, actually, that's a perfect transition into the next slide here about the cybersecurity framework. So just, because I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time getting into all the bells and whistles of everything under each category, but a couple common examples here is under the identify portion. That really is just understanding what the environment looks like, what you're working with, what you have to protect, what data's out there. So you get into things like inventory management. That can be done through a whole million different ways of doing it. RMM tools. For us and our client base, we use an RMM to be able to service our clients. That provides us a lot of data back and helps build those asset inventories. But also under this, you have to have your risk assessments, your governance, what kind of rules, restrictions, and everything around data exist. And as Bob was just mentioning, your compliance frameworks. If you've got a mandate to be HIPAA compliant, but you don't have that identified appropriately, then you're going to have some problems elsewhere. And depending on what's going on out there, especially in the defense industrial bases, those problems can cost a lot of money or be very damaging to the business. So that has to be very clearly identified.
And I want to just point attention to the last two categories, respond and recover, because none of these strategies are 100% foolproof. The bad guys there's always going to be a way that they could possibly get in, that they can possibly try to implement whatever their strategy is. And so it's just as important for us to know how to deal with it, both from a response standpoint, which is minimizing the damage, and a recover standpoint, which, like its name implies, is to recover from whatever damage is done.
Yep, a perfect example of that too. The same group that compromised Microsoft compromised another company called Okta. They act as a provider for multi-factor authentication, and that's pretty scary to think about.
Yeah.
Take that back further. There were some IT tools that were compromised with SolarWinds and Kaseya. So when we look at those items, we look at it and say, oh, well, it's a good it didn't happen to any of our tools, but what if it did? Because it very well could have.
Yep.
There's certainly nothing wrong with those Okta customers that, picking Okta as a provider, but they've got some problems to deal with now. I'll briefly touch on the protect and detect portions. These are where you typically see a lot of your fancy tools, like your antivirus, firewall, DNS filtering, things like multi-factor authentication. But it also encompasses things like your security awareness training. Think those phishing emails that the employees get all the time. Well, they've got to know what to do with them. That training is part of that protection for the environment, and making sure that training program is effective to hit those threats. It also gets into things like basic system maintenance. You see things out there in the security space of all these crazy vulnerabilities, and every time one of those gets disclosed, typically there's a patch for it. So it's making sure those patches and whatnot get applied and that those maintenance tasks are being handled. Yeah, something to add, Bob?
Yeah, the one thing I want to add on the protect side is we also have found several cases with new clients where the previous folks, they had some of the tools in place, but they weren't configured, they weren't monitored, they weren't managed.
Yep.
And it's kind of like, you have this great super secret secure door with great locks and all that, but someone puts a brick to make sure it's held open.
Yep. Yeah, or so many things that we see elsewhere too, where we look at a firewall rule, for instance, and go, "This is very open. Like, why is it that way?" And you find out it was because a vendor said, "Oh, we need this open and allowed to the entire Amazon Web Service network." Well, the
Yep.
bad guys use AWS too, so things like that. When you get into detection, though, you get a lot of fancy tools around that. Your endpoint detection response stuff, security event management capabilities. But detection can also even get into something. You can have a human-created threat hunt, basically. You're sitting there, you're doing your system maintenance tasks or whatever. You're looking in the event logs, and you just happen to notice, wait a minute, why is administrator having all these failed password attempts? The tools can help with that, but you can certainly find stuff manually. Or to go back to what Bob said, you look for the door for the server room that's supposed to be locked, and it's propped open with a brick. So then respond and recover, as Bob was mentioning, you can have outsourced companies with SOC services and all that stuff, but there's also, more importantly, your incident response planning and preparation, and your disaster recovery plans, which is, factor into things like having good backups and whatnot. So takeaways from that. This is a layered approach. It combines both technical and operational items. If we go back looking at like the identify portion, you've got your asset inventories. Yeah, that's technical stuff, but it's also part of operations and making sure that stays up to date, which we'll get into some of that stuff in a few slides. But this is a cycle that also builds upon itself. Perfect thing I was saying probably for the last 3 months is I cannot adequately defend what I don't have identified. So it's just keeps building upon itself from there. And like I mentioned, most of those fancy tools that exist out there that every vendor out there is emailing you about every other day, those only really focus on a couple key areas. And if you're investing your money into things significantly into antivirus and defensive tools, that's great. That'll help you out a lot in those two key areas. But again, if you don't know what you have to defend and you aren't paying attention to that and you don't have that info, how can you defend that when you've got Kathy in accounting's computer with no antivirus on it because it never threw the alert and she just clicked the link on it because the security training failed? And that gets into those things of simple items are often the most overlooked. You look at some of the key incidents that have happened in the last year. We'll use the Colonial Pipeline incident. TeamViewer was installed on a workstation that it shouldn't have been on with a simple default credential that was easily guessed and compromised. And as a result, millions of people couldn't buy gas.
Yep.
Pretty crazy. So that's a lot of stuff. So let's simplify it a bit. And let's get into some of those key questions you can start asking yourself, start asking others in the business, and start that conversation to move the needle. So we're going to break down those key areas and throw some questions out there and hopefully get you guys some stuff that's going to be helpful for you. So identify. Do you have a robust asset inventory? This isn't just the spreadsheet that you wrote up a couple of years ago when you were planning to upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 10. But is it commonly updated? Does it include things like software items, what the purpose of the machine is, who common users are, and is it up to date? Because Lord knows that asset inventory is not very helpful if it was written, say, going from Windows XP to Windows 7 and it hasn't been touched in 5 years. Next up, do you understand those compliance obligations? There's stuff around HIPAA, GDPR, CMMC, and it's a whole bunch of different acronyms out there. But do you understand those and what those entail? A great example of that one, if you operate under the state of Ohio, there's the Ohio Data Protection Act. That outlines specific compliance objectives to follow on to protect the organization from risk. Then that gets into having a risk governance strategy. Do you have a plan to manage those risks and work with them and know what's out there, what's been accepted, what's not been accepted, what is completely unacceptable? And when was the last time that was reviewed and up to date? And then lastly, have you performed a risk assessment recently? Things change all the time, especially with COVID and work from home and how organizations have adapted to it. You know, a risk assessment from 3 years ago, before the pandemic really kicked into gear, may not be valid anymore. Again, things also change. Maybe you had implemented a new cloud-based application. Has a risk assessment been done incorporating that into the environment?
So to throw a couple points here, when Adam's talking about some of these things, and even some of these line items may sound a bit overwhelming. How do I do it? But the question is, and this gets back to what Adam was saying earlier, you're trying to move your needle. You're trying to make it so that you've got more information at the end of the day than you had at the beginning of the day. So for example, a robust asset inventory, just do you know what the ages are of the computers, whether or not you've got all the operating systems up to date? And then you can, then if that's the case, same thing then for your servers, for your switches, for your wireless access points. And if you've got that information, then you can start saying, are we patching them? All of that kind of fun stuff. Now, if you have a well, I'll say armed IT department or a managed service provider, yay, like Simplex-IT, that stuff's done automatically. We automatically identify them, we add them to the inventory, and we've got, and we do that. But any way, shape, or form, it's just move the needle forward. Your compliance obligations, don't forget your vendors. Because in a lot of cases, vendors or clients may have their own requirements, especially if you're in the automotive industry, what they require their customers or vendors, suppliers to do.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, Adam, you're going to.
I was like, if there's one key takeaway under that compliance obligations, as Bob mentioned with vendors, the number one question I ask any new vendor that we consider doing business with is, what is your shared responsibility matrix? That details what we're responsible for and what they're responsible for. And that gets really interesting when you start going down that compliance road, because you may say, if you've got a fancy instant response tool that's outsourced, oh yeah, I'm compliant with this because, you know, company ABC handles this for me. And if we get compromised or breached or whatever in any way, shape, or form, they'll just take care of it. And when when that day comes and you actually ask them, they go, what are you talking about? We don't do that. So that shared responsibility matrix puts that stuff into writing. And what we're finding a lot of companies, because this is one of the newer things that's happening recently, is a lot of the responses we get is, here you go, we've got it done. But we also get we're defining that and working on it. But we've had a couple conversations with a few vendors that in the prospecting phase for new tools where they say, what's that? Usually my next words out of my mouth are, thanks for your time today.
And the one last point I want to make on this is, when we talk about risk assessment, here's a simple exercise you can do. What would happen if you became evil? And what I mean by that is, let's just say you used all of the security that you had access to, the passwords, the accounts, whatever, and you decided to do as much damage or pull out as much data as you could for the organization using the equipment that you had access to. That's essentially what happens in some situations if you get hacked or hijacked. And you can do that for your key personnel as well. Or when we get back to John Smith over in the shop floor, what could that person do? And it's really interesting because there's some cases where someone says, well, I need access to this because I might need it someday. And then when we ask this question, they're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have access to it, or not as easy access to it.
Yeah, I love the tickets that have come through over the years of business owners saying, well, I need access to all this stuff because I'm the business owner and need access to all this.
Right.
And the first question I come back and ask, and Bob, you can even validate some of this too, is do you really need access to, and for what purpose? For instance, we've got a lot of our fancy tool sets out there. Bob doesn't need to work out of them on a day-to-day basis. So he can just look at the tool. He can't do much in them.
Yep. And that's the way I like it.
Yep. I guess into the whole thing of principle of least privilege, and that's a whole topic for another day.
Cool. All right.
So let's get into protect now. Because again, we can start introducing some of our tools here, but it's more than just the fancy tools. Figure most people in this webinar should have antivirus and firewall solutions, but have they been reviewed recently? Maybe you had some ports open for an on-premise mail server years ago that doesn't exist. Have those been closed up? It has a piece of
Especially
software.
remote desktop.
Right, yeah. Remote desktop's very common there. Other various remote access ports and whatnot. Again, try not to get too technical and bore everyone to sleep today with all that. But have those things been reviewed? Have they been updated? And are they defined? Clearing up those exclusions really help out. Real world example of that. Last summer when one of the IT tools was compromised and used, they sit there and said in the vendor documentation is, you need to exclude our tool from all antivirus scanning. Surprise, the tool was used to deploy ransomware and it was excluded in antivirus, so antivirus didn't bother detecting it until it was too late. Scary stuff. But more importantly than that, this gets into regular maintenance tasks. Are you doing that software patching, those workstation patching, those software updates, etc.? Those are fixing your security vulnerabilities. Those are moving the needle. Things aren't like they used to be, where Microsoft would release a patch and it was kind of the, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it model. As the security industry is pointing out, stuff's broke. Stuff is very broke. So that's what those patches are there to prevent. I think about every month when Microsoft releases its security updates, it's fixing anywhere between 50 and 90 different security vulnerabilities every month. Next up is multi-factor authentication. Not having it right now is a bad practice. A lot of insurance companies are mandating it. But most important on that is, first off, are you doing it for your admin roles? Because those are the keys to the kingdom. If your 365 global admin account gets compromised, think of the evil that could happen from a malicious standpoint. Access to everyone's mailbox, the ability to put extra stuff in there and really, get sensitive data out. That's terrifying. So at minimum, your admin accounts, but ultimately, everyone's accounts for web services if the bad guy can access it. Lord knows end users out there, and probably some of us are on our own, probably have a password out there that's been compromised in some data breach that of no fault to the organization, no fault of our own. But chances are those are out there. Those are being sold. People are using them. I think about once a month, I see someone's trying to access my gaming accounts and stuff like that for video games. And it's using an old password that I've long since abandoned, but someone's trying. Multi-factor stops that. And then last up on this is, are you subscribed to any security alerting channels? And if you are you acting on them? There's a lot of great groups out there that are going out, finding the alerts and the advisories and stuff, and sharing that information. The Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Administration is one of them. CompTIA has what's called an ISO, an Internet or an Information Sharing Organization. The FBI has one called InfraGard. There's plenty of really great ones out there that are finding these nasty vulnerabilities and stuff and sharing them with the community at large so we can be proactive about this. Some of them are free, some of them cost money, but the information that comes out of those is invaluable.
So just to throw something in there, I'm actually on one of CompTIA's advisory panels, and I was in Chicago for a few days last week to talk about some of the stuff. Some of the material, some of the cybersecurity material, educational and otherwise, that CompTIA has put out. Remember, CompTIA is not a vendor; they're vendor neutral. Is really good, and it's right up there with some of the NIST stuff that Adam was talking about earlier. So that's good stuff. But I also want to talk about these first three. These three things, if there's anything technically you take away from this conversation we're having now, it's these three things. And not just from a standpoint of reviewing and regular tasks, but also that someone is monitoring them through some form of centralized management console, whatever. Because you may have it, like Adam was saying, you may have it configured to allow certain access, but you don't know that that's being taken advantage of because no one's looking at it. Or that firewall updates are available, or that need to be done, but no one's watching it. Adam, you're going to say?
I was just agreeing with you.
Sorry, I didn't recognize that. So,
Yeah, it doesn't happen terribly often.
And the same thing for patching. And also, what are you going to do about the software that's obsolete? your Windows 7 boxes, your Server 2008 and 8R2. Some cases you can't update it because of, programs or applications or devices that won't work anymore. This is mostly true on the manufacturing side. And if that's the case, fine, but then defend that device by making it so it doesn't connect with anything else on the network, and certainly nothing on the internet.
Yeah, and of course, to build back off a previous point, can't do that if you don't have everything identified.
Yep. Good point.
So moving on to the next one. I skipped over, in the framework, the response, or not the response, but some of the steps in there. Because again, that just gets into a lot of the fancy tools out there. And I'm trying not to make this a sales pitch and say, well, go out and spend a whole bunch of money. Because these are the things that we can start looking at too otherwise. So we're just skipping on to the response step here. So that's the first question there is, do you have an incident response plan? Running and screaming and going out to the bar is not an incident response plan. Had to tell Kevin that earlier this year.
Worked for me.
But basically that incident response plan getting into, okay, what do we do if this happens? Who needs to get involved? What do we do about it? Is that plan up to date? It's great if it says contact the insurance provider, but it's an insurance provider from 5 years ago that you stopped doing business with. So keeping those reviewed and up to date is critical. Then are all the key stakeholders in the organization aware of that incident response plan? Security is a team effort. It does involve multiple people to help out and support that. Looking at ourselves and looking at things internally. What if us as a managed service provider gets a security incident and gets compromised? Well, we need to make sure key people are notified so they can take action. That includes sales and marketing. Because sales and marketing is great at getting out communications to people. So if we have a critical incident on our end, I've got a channel where I can say, hey, let's get information out to our clients and let them know what we're doing about stuff quickly, efficiently, and easily. Kind of weird to think about it, but it works. But internally in your organization, that could be your shop floor management. That could be your HR people, your accounting people, leadership roles. People need to be aware and know what their role is to play. So that way, as you're running through your plan and doing stuff, you've got people keeping people out of the way so that you can do your job effectively, but also keeping the right people in the loop about things. So ways you can do that are things like tabletop exercises. Have you been doing any of those? Thinking about what a tabletop exercise is you sit down and you go through, what if this happens? What do we do about it? Person over here, company, accounting person. What is your role in this? How are you going to perform this? We ran through one a while ago, where we simulated an incident on our end. And one of the questions that was asked in that exercise is, okay, help desk technicians, you get a call from the local news asking for a comment. What do you do? I guess it was one of those weird, nuanced questions that you don't really think about when looking at it at a technical level that all work to contain some of this damage that can occur and make sure things go as planned. And then lastly, do you have trusted partners available to assist if something goes wrong? We look at that for ourselves. We recommend that for our clients as well. Are those trusted partners covered under your cybersecurity insurance policy? There's a lot of really great people out there, but insurance wants to keep their costs down, so they may or may not foot the bill for it or not. So having those trusted partners, going back, identified, helps make that process a lot easier, make sure that we know what you're doing when it comes time, and that because you're practicing it and the right people are aware that if the worst happens, you're ready to go.
And to me, this slide can be best summed up by a saying I like to say frequently, and that is the worst time to learn CPR is when someone's having a heart attack. Like I said, no strategy is 100% effective as far as preventing cybersecurity incidents from happening. And if you don't have a clue what you're going to do in case an incident does happen, then you're going to be making it up from scratch as you go. And in many cases, depending upon the type of incident, you can actually make things significantly worse.
Yeah,
both from a technical standpoint and from a financial and liability standpoint.
Yeah, a perfect example of that literally happening and unfolding as we speak. That MFA provider I mentioned earlier, they were compromised months ago. They said nothing happened. The ransomware group said, nope, that's BS. Here's proof. They said, well, you didn't get access to what you said you got access to. And they said, no, we did. Here's the proof. They're like, well, you didn't compromise any client data. But yeah, we did. Here's the proof. Okay, well, it's only a small handful of customers. No, it was a lot more than that. Here's the proof. Okay, fine. It was like 360 customers. That's where it's sitting at right now. I've not had a chance to check to see if that's evolved since this morning, but think of what that's doing and how they're handling that and the damage that's causing. It's eroding the trust of the technology industry against them. I guarantee there are going to be organizations reviewing their MFA policies and who they do business with and saying, I don't want to do business with this company anymore as a result of how they handled it.
And I'll give you another example on a smaller scale. I got an email from another managed service provider who was partnering with yet another managed service provider. This was in another state of the country, had nothing to do with anybody we work with. And their largest client was hacked. Basically, they had left a firewall setting open, and they got to it and was able to encrypt not only all of their data on their servers, but all of their backups, because stuff wasn't it was poorly configured, it was poorly monitored, and it was poorly managed. No offense against the small MSP that was responsible for this. But what was, I hate to say fun, was getting an email at 7 o'clock Sunday morning, essentially saying, the guy doesn't know what to do next. What should I tell him? And, this was, and we gave some advice, and the advice had a lot to do with don't do anything, contact these following parties or organizations. But again, this stuff does happen. And if it happens and you've got no clue what to do next, you're in a world of hurt.
Yeah, I wish I would have thought of this when I was writing the slide deck, because I have another bullet point to add here. Don't be afraid to involve law enforcement.
Absolutely.
The biggest things that I've seen from the federal government these days is they need data and they need information.
Yep.
There's conversations about legislating that and mandating it, about if something happens, you have to respond. But there are also compliance frameworks, especially for the defense industrial base, that say you definitely have to do this. But think about it. If someone breaks into your house and you just go, well, I'll just fix the window and not tell anyone, how are the police going to catch the guy to make sure it doesn't happen again or happen to your neighbors? Same thing in the cyber world. Notifying the FBI and getting their expertise and resources critical. Notifying CISA and the DHS is critical, especially in the current climate right now with the looming threat of possible cyber warfare. These are people that are, to put it bluntly, a heck of a lot smarter than I am, and they're a lot better at what they do than I am.
And we will send you some resources, or actually we have resources at the end of this presentation about some of the sites to go to for some of this information.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. All right.
Okay, so the worst has happened. You've identified stuff, but there were problems there. The bad guys got in. You had your protection mechanisms to take care of it, but unfortunately, they were a little bit savvy and got around stuff. You've responded to it. You've gone through this stuff. You followed through your incident response plan. It was up to date. All the key stakeholders did their jobs. The trusted partners did their thing. So now we need to recover. So, do you have a disaster recovery plan, and when was it last updated? The plans are great and everything, but when you go to recover from backups, have they been tested and do they work, both on-site and off-site? Bob mentioned with the incident that happened with some other companies out there, the backups were hit too. So do you have those set up, good to go, and are they viable backups? And again, have you conducted any disaster recovery tabletops with all appropriate stakeholders? What would happen if you were to go into the server room right now and just unplug everything? Nothing's available anymore. What do we do? Natural disasters can occur at any moment. Your random acts of God events can occur as well at any time. What do we do about them? And have we conducted those exercises to make sure there's a plan in place?
And the one thing I will add to this is that the last line of defense for almost all bad things in IT is a good backup. Can't emphasize enough. And we've talked to so many potential clients or bringing them on board who went cheap on their backups and lived to regret it.
Yeah. I don't want to turn this all sales pitchy and everything and start doing vendor endorsements and all this other stuff. The backup provider that we utilize is literally saved my bacon more times than I'd like to admit whenever it comes to these kind of critical things, whether it be because of a security incident or because of simple human error.
Yep.
So. Okay, so we've gone through the framework there. We've listed some things out, but it's important to start just figuring out where to go from here. So we've got this resource available, our common sense security thing, where we can just go through a handful of bullet points there and measure their impact, and both from an operational standpoint and a cost standpoint. Bob, since this is a little bit more your brainchild there, do you want to elaborate a little bit more about this?
Well, actually, we're using this with permission from an MSP vendor. Actually, put together this for the most part. But this is a fairly simple process. If you take a look at the grid, the stuff from left to right is how expensive the stuff is. So the stuff that's far on the left is the most expensive. On the far right is the least expensive. So you can get an idea of what the cost is to implement some of these strategies. And then from top to bottom is the level of impact. All right, what's going to make the most effect on you? So the bottom line is the stuff on the top right doesn't cost a whole heck of a lot of money, but it has an impact on your organization. So this will give you an idea, first of all, to get that snapshot of where you're at right now. You can kind of go through it, and you'll see that we've got both protection, preventing the bad things from happening, and then response. What do you do if the bad things happen? And you can kind of go through and just identify which of these you have implemented. And by implementing, you don't check it off if you've got it installed, but nobody's configured it or nobody's looked at it. No. We're not letting you off that easy. You check it off if it is something you have implemented and you've reviewed and somebody is responsible for making sure it's done properly. All right. But as you can see, just putting in an enforced password policy, it's up on the top right. Doesn't cost a lot of money to implement, and it's got a high level of impact. And multi-factor authentication, it's got a high impact. Yeah, there's a little more involvement as far as the price goes. But this is just a great tool, and I love it. And it gets to the point, and you can use it both from a budgeting standpoint and a low-hanging fruit standpoint for your organization. The last point I'll make on this is also keep in mind that your organization may require more of this stuff or less of this stuff if you are a single location or you have no location. Everybody is working from anywhere. You're completely cloud-based. You're completely on-prem based. So not everything is going to be 100% appropriate to you, but it's a great starting point.
Yep, absolutely agreed. So let's start wrapping up here. So just a reminder on this, that cybersecurity isn't just an IT issue. It does start with leadership and management. It does have to include the entire organization. It does impact corporate culture, and it does require those plans, processes, and checklists. Again, going back to that CIA triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, those should be the guiding principles as you start building these plans out and start working with stakeholders across the organization. I know we've been doing a lot of stuff internally on our end to move the needle, increase our level of security, keep our security up to date, and move that. Wouldn't be possible without Bob and Kevin's involvement. Otherwise, we'd be fighting an uphill battle. One of my objectives this quarter is to work with Patty on the marketing side of stuff to better understand some of the stuff that's going on over there, make sure we're handling that with security in mind. It's involving everyone, and it's great on our end here. Tooting our own horn a little bit, that we've got a whole bunch of great people that get it and value it and are willing to collaborate to make us a lot more of a secure institution and move that needle a little bit further.
And it's a constant investment on our part, and I've referred to it in some other videos as it's an infinite game. It is not going away, and whatever it is today, it is going to be very different a month from now and even different more a year from now.
Yep, absolutely. So some additional things and some additional points to keep in mind. Remember the framework. So what I mean by that is the cybersecurity, the NIST cybersecurity framework, your CIA triad. But if there's also compliance mandates, they also have frameworks. Remember they exist, and keep an eye on those and review them and make sure you're implementing. Don't forget to address your technical debt. As Bob was mentioning, your old legacy systems that may exist out there, don't forget about them. Make sure they're addressed and adequately protected. There are free resources from CISA. You can go to the website there and check some of those out. They've got risk assessment services, free pen testing services, and a lot of really amazing free information that they share, and that's just your tax dollars at work. I'll complain time and time again about how I pay all this money in taxes and my roads still have a lot of potholes in them. When it comes to CISA, I'm getting my money's worth.
Yeah.
They make my job infinitely easier. One of the things they've done is point out bad practices, eliminate them. If you go click on that link at some point and check it out, simple things: eliminate your unsupported software and operating systems. So the Windows 7 box that exists because it just still exists, get rid of it. Patch stuff, enforce multi-factor authentication. Single factor authentication is on that list. And then lastly, especially in those current times, stay vigilant. We've seen over the last couple months increased notices from the federal government, from the executive branch down through the various agencies, about the threats of nation-state actors, especially Russia right now, given the current geopolitical climate. They've outlined some amazingly great resources. And on that website right there, they even have things of, if you're the IT person, here are the talking points to bring to leadership. It is very comprehensive, very well thought out, and really good information. Highly recommend that, not just because of the current situation out there, but because it's good stuff to remember long term.
Yep, agreed.
So next steps here. Do the mirror test. Are you taking this seriously enough for your organization? Review what you have, identify those gaps, and if you need to, reach out. We're happy to help and share and do what we can to help you out.
And let me point out one thing on the mirror test, a real simple, easier version of the mirror test. Are you treating security more importantly from a resource, a financial, whatever, today than you were 2 years ago? If the answer is no, you're not taking it seriously enough.
Yep. And if you want to keep it measured as well. The thing I like to say is, if you want to make the most secure environment, just go ahead and take everything, chuck it in the lake. Sure, it'll be secure, but not very available or very useful.
I like that idea.
Me too. An idea that really floats.
I was thinking anyway, but
Yeah, we can make the puns all day too. But no, just make sure it's a measured approach, keep it balanced, but keep it a priority.
Yep.
My security goals inside the company only represent, they might be the most important thing in my world, just the small things in the big picture, but at least their goals, they're listed and there's progress made. So moving on to the next slide. If I seriously hope you get one thing out of this, just one key thing out of this, is that cybersecurity isn't just about the fancy tools, but it's about robust processes, and it doesn't have to be expensive. And how can we help? Said at the very beginning, the more we can share and collaborate and work together, the better. And if there's things we can do to help, by all means, reach out. So I think this is a good transition over to Bob's points here.
Yay. So here's the thing we'd love to do is we'd love to set up a 30-minute virtual meeting, and we're going to talk about your status quo for cybersecurity within your organization. We'll talk about expectations of this year and next year for that matter, and get you started with our tools. We've got some of these tools that we talked about that's going to help you do a better assessment. That quadrant thing for starters. We've got some other ones as well. We'll give you some hints as far as how we use them and how we think they'll go well. And then we'll answer questions about your unique situation, because like I said, on the manufacturing side, you got people who are using the old systems. On the work from anywhere side, you've got people who are forced to work from home networks that are monitored or managed by, home private firewalls or the like, or working from Starbucks. We can talk with you about that, because we're not looking to shut everybody down. We're looking to assist with you. So we offer this meeting, no charge.
Yep. One of the great things that I like about that is we've got a bunch of clients in different unique situations. And, one of the things in the MSP space is we've seen a lot of stuff over the years. those weird nuanced stuff that only really matter for one location, but everyone thinks, oh, it just happened to this client from 6 years ago. We'll never see this again. Then we sign the new client that, surprise, it's back. So we're happy to share that knowledge and insights, those things we've learned, things we've done, things we've seen. We reach out and we work with our vendors and peers across the industry to see what they're doing, what works, and what we can bring over.
Yeah. If you've seen any of our webinars, we share.
Yep.
Cool. So if you're interested in that, and this is one of our two main offerings, pure managed IT services, that's where we essentially take over the IT role for your organization, both from an operational, tactical, strategic, as well as from a security standpoint. Bob C at simplex-it.com. Just email me and we'll set something up to talk to you. This is for organizations that don't need or don't want an internal IT department. Our second manages co-managed IT services, and we literally we've written the only 2 books on co-managed IT services, so we can talk, because how can you have an IT department that knows everything about everything? So we can actually partner and really give your IT staff superpowers, and you can't abdicate cybersecurity, so it's all on us, but we can partner together so that together we're going to give your organization the best IT experience and the most productive and secure IT experience. So either one of those, we're happy to talk to you about.
I do like we wrote the book on it, because I certainly didn't write anything in those books.
Well, except for that one time where we just drew weird stick figures.
Oh, I did make the Bob caricature.
Yes, you did. But we would love to get some feedback on this. First of all, also, if you have any questions whatsoever, please put it in the chat. Anything, and also, was this worthwhile? Some feedback would be great.
Yep, and that'll do it for the slide deck. So we do have a couple minutes left, and we can get into a few things. If you guys have questions, want to open the floor up a little bit and chat and share some ideas.
And of course, we're going to take the optimistic view that therefore you answered all of their questions. Not seeing any feedback. Terrific. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for jumping on the call. Hopefully, again, this was useful. Any feedback would be fantastic. Adam, as always, good stuff.
Yep. Thanks for joining in with us and having a good conversation here. And yeah, appreciate everyone for taking the time to listen to me ramble about security for an hour.
Seriously, this is the minimum we can get him to ramble about security.
Yeah, I got the reminder at Teams saying that there's 5 minutes left in the scheduled meeting.
Yeah. I didn't do that.
If I didn't get that, we'd be here all night.
All right. I guess that's it then. Thanks, everybody.
Yep, thanks.